I would like to welcome everyone. This is the Don't See blog, and the first interview that we are going to make with Dániel Siptár, the head of the Hungarian Jesuit archive. We thank you that you came and give the interview about the work of the Hungarian Jesuit works in China in this century.
Thank you for asking me to do this interview.
In the Hungarian Jesuit newspaper, Steve heard in English, it was written in 1921, Hungarian Jesuits are going to China. Great news! The Superior General of the Society of Jesus has designated a separate area within the missionary territory of the French Jesuits operating in China for the Hungarian Jesuits. Upon hearing this news, two shout with joy along with Saint Francis Xavier, Lord China, mighty China, what a field of work. The population of China exceeds 400 million, thus it accounts for more than a quarter of the world's population. Its culture is one of the oldest among the cultures of the people living in the world. The first question is, how and why did Hungarians become involved in the Jesuit mission in China?
Actually, it was the Hungarian Soviet Republic, so-called Tanácsköztársaság, a regime which were really anti-Catholic and anti-religious orders, which made the superior provincial of the Hungarian Jesuits, János Somogyi, to make a vow that if the Hungarian Jesuits remained harmless, or survived during this harassment or even persecution of this Hungarian Soviet Republic, then the Hungarian province would take part in a mission abroad, a mission, let's say, in the Indies, when they used to put it, so far away, over the seas, or overseas,
Far away from
Hungary. So he actually approached Superior General in Rome in 1920 that he is ready to send missionaries into China. He already mentioned China. But back to the reasons. Second thing was the Treaty of Trianon, which made Hungary quite isolated, and when this treaty cut off 2/3 of the territory of Hungary.
Because Hungary was the first one.
Yeah, it was right after the First World War, and one of the explicit reasons was to break out of this isolation somehow. For example, to prove to the West, prove to the world that Hungary is quite determined and brave and heroic whatsoever. So they want to show everybody that they are able to send missionaries abroad.
Even China.
Even China. And why China? It's maybe, I'm not really sure, Peter Van, the greatest expert on this topic, suggests that it's because of kind of an Orientalism called Turanism. Back then, it's a quite new, let's say, theory in the beginning of the 20th century. It used to be new back then, and it actually Hungarians started to search for their kinship, and so they found or thought that they found kinship in the East and even in the Far East, for example, China. So maybe this theory was behind the decision that they wanted to go particularly to China, and so they actually insisted that they want to go to China because the Superior General offered other places as well. So, for example, Finland or places like that. But no, János Somogyi, the superior provincial, kept on asking him that that he wants to go to China.
How did it begin? How many Hungarian Jesuits participated in the first missionary work in China?
In 1922, only one Hungarian Jesuit arrived to China, Miklós Szarvas, who first had to learn the language at all. So his first 2 years were spent by learning Chinese. But it was not, he was not alone, of course, because French Jesuits were in the territory in the region from let's say, almost the middle of the 19th century. This particular territory was a little bit southwest of Beijing, the province called Hebei, if I pronounce it correctly, of the Champagne Jesuits in Xi'an, and the southern part of this Xi'an mission was a place where the French wanted to send the Hungarians later on. But back to 1922, only one Hungarian Jesuit was there, but the French actually were quite old in the region, so that's why they called for Austrians as well, and the Hungarians. So in 1924, another Hungarian joined, and in 1926, 3 other Hungarians joined, and some sisters of the Congregation of School Sisters of Our Lady of Kalocsa. So a town in southern Hungary had some sisters whose work was to teach girls, basically. And in 1926, Henri Lecroix, a French missionary bishop from the region, actually came to Hungary and visited, for example, these sisters and the Jesuits all around Hungary to somehow recruit new missionaries for this enterprise. So after 1926, when there were already five of them, almost every year there were new missionaries arriving to China. So by the end, the 1940s, there were approximately more than 30 at the same time, and altogether during this, let's say, a little bit more than 30 years of the mission, there were 40 Hungarian Jesuits who were in China for many years, or at least a short period. Several Jesuits studied not only Chinese language after arriving in China, but later theology in China. So they actually studied Catholic theology and became priests, ordained priests in China. So there were a lot of very young Hungarian Jesuits arriving there, and so completing their formation overseas.
What do you think? What was the reason behind that so young, so just studying Hungarian Jesuits were sent? Not one, not two, but several Hungarian novitius were sent to China without higher skill.
There are at least 2 reasons for that, I think. First of all, Hungarian province was quite new in the 20s and the 30s as well, because it was, as an independent province, it was only founded in 1909. So there weren't enough priests, maybe even for Hungary itself. So it was a huge sacrifice to let Jesuits go. That meant that they needed the ones who were already experienced in Hungary, but they had several novices, so several youngsters who wanted to be Jesuits. So the future was really bright for them. So they had more youngsters than experienced old priests. This is one thing. Second is that it is a very hard job to be a missionary, and maybe they thought if they start in a younger age, they can accommodate more or learn the language better, or things like that. So maybe this could help. Of course, it was really hard for them, and not everybody could make it. There were not one or two, but a little bit more who gained sicknesses, mental problems, whatever. So it was really a hard job being there. Completely different climate, completely different food, everything very different. Only the strongest ones were really successful, and there were several of these 40 who became really confused, even challenged with sometimes serious mental problems. Some even died there.
So what were the difficulties that generally, not only the younger, but even the older Jesuit monks encountered in China during their mission?
Yeah, first of all, everything was unfamiliar. So, as I mentioned, food was completely different, climate was, and for example, to travel was very, very hard because there were no proper roads, for example. In the first time, they didn't have normal vehicles, and later they got, for example, bicycles and one or two motor bicycles. That was the top, yeah, top quality of travel vehicles. So it was really hard to accommodate themselves, which is really a Jesuit-like thing, is inculturation, so trying to adapt to the local culture, way of life, whatever. And they tried their best. For example, they grew beards, which in China means wisdom and old age, or ate as many real local food as they could. There are some historical sources which say it was not really successful. For example, Chinese local Catholic priests kept on complaining about the Hungarians and, let's say, all the foreigners not to speak Chinese enough, for example, to them. So it's a little bit ambiguous. Hungarians thought they did everything to adapt. Chinese thought a little differently, but it was also very difficult. And of course, there were several other problems, basically because of different occupations. So, historical reasons why it became extraordinarily hard for in the late 30s and early 40s, the mid 30s, there were great floods, and so poverty, famine.
So possibly many migrants,
Yeah,
people,
refugees and bandits who tried to make their living out of stealing and robbing others, etc. Then the Japanese occupation, together with other attacks, and of course civil war started, where there were not only the Japanese but the Chinese nationalists, the Reds, and the bandits, thieves, whatever. So it was a it was like a battlefield from the mid 30s.
Everyone against everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the European missionaries were aliens or foreigners for every.
That's the worst.
Yeah, that's the worst, exactly. But the Catholic Chinese, who helped a lot, for example, gave food and etc. and refuge sometimes. So the Chinese Catholics were really helpful, but all the others basically only attacked the missionaries. And of course, they had other problems, like personal problems between some Jesuits, or the one that I mentioned, that relationship with the Chinese Jesuits, because it's very important to mention that there were not only Hungarian Jesuits in the mission, but there were also locals. So not only Chinese Jesuits, but Chinese Jesuits who were members of the Hungarian province, because they joined the Society of Jesus through the Hungarian Jesuits, so they became Hungarian Jesuits, being Chinese. So this is very important to mention, but of course there were internal problems, language problems, cultural problems. So yeah. The worst things was these battlefield events.
So we heard about the difficulties that the Hungarian Jesuits encountered, but what was the positive side of their work? How much their work was beneficial for the local Chinese people?
Yeah, first of all, the number of the Catholics grew year by year, actually. Well, it was not a huge success, they would say, or some would say, because only 1% and later 2% of the local population became Christians, but still, that's Catholic. Yeah. That's some kind of success. So they had results, let's say pastoral results. For example, they published a book after the first 10 years of their work, their mission there, and they published several numbers in it, where they year by year they give the numbers. For example, how many Catholics there are, how many people learn the catechesis, so the religious education, how many churches there are, for example, or how many marriages, everything, basically. So they had nice results in their original aims, but there were some, let's say, collateral results as well, because basically everywhere where they had church or Catholic community, they had schools. So this was maybe the basic work for them. Sometimes even more important than evangelization, because they also taught not Catholic or non-Christian Chinese in their schools. They were primary schools, basically, where they learned writing, reading, some foreign languages sometimes, and where they had religious education as well, and some other basic skills. So it was very important for the local Chinese people that there were schools. Before that, there were no schools in those regions.
So they were the Hungarian Jesuits were the first that established real schools for the local Chinese children.
In some regions they were the first. In some regions, of course, in the centers there were already schools founded before, like French. But I mean, the schools spread during the Hungarian mission time as well.
Hungarian Jesuits taught for Chinese children Chinese language?
Well, no. Basically not Chinese language, foreign languages, French, maybe sometimes English or Latin. It depends how old those children were. But they helped in teaching, writing, for example, etc. Basically, they sometimes they taught themselves, of course, but they trained Chinese people to teach Chinese children. So, for example, in the center of their mission, they had a teacher training institution, a kind of a teacher training school, where they trained catechists, so religion teachers, but I mean they emphasized the teacher training in general. So in their schools, of course, it was not possible for them to teach in every school of the region, but they were in charge of placing the right teachers to the right school. So this was one let's say collateral, but very central other result. And there was, of course, healing, which made them very popular, because there was no, also in this region back then, there was no real health care or network for healthcare. So sometimes Jesuits were the only ones who tried to heal local people.
Were there real doctors among the monks?
Yeah, actually there were some French Jesuits who were doctors as well. Among the Hungarians there were no real doctors, but some people studied something about medicine before they went to China. And they became actually doctors there because they learned from each other, and by learning, and they had the equipment, they had some extra knowledge that made them more successful in healing. Teaching healing, offering refuge for the ones who lost their homes in the great floods, for example, or they went and held catechisms in prisons, or during the cholera epidemic in 1938, they got vaccinated and went to minister the dying people. And of course, in their schools there were not only Christian students but others as well. So all these were kind of instruments of evangelization, which aimed conversion to Catholic religion. So they were instruments for them, but meant maybe more to the Chinese who were not Catholics, because for example, they weren't interested in Christendom or Catholicism, but they received some medical assistance and knowledge by learning. So that helped the local people a lot, and basically maybe that's why the number of conversions as well increased.
So the local population possibly liked them.
Yeah, yes, you can tell that most of them liked them, but of course not all of them, because the ones I mentioned, so different groups didn't really want foreign assistance or presence in the region.
In which settlements were the Hungarian Jesuits were working in China?
Actually, their missionary territory was in Hebei province, which I already mentioned, which is in North China, around near Beijing, to the south, basically. And the French, the Champagne French province, had this Xi'an mission, and the south part of that was the place where the Hungarians were sent. So the very center was Taming, which was a little bit bigger city there, and there were other centers around it, basically to the south of it. From north to south, I try to name them: Nanlo, Jingfeng, Puyang, which is back then it was called Kaizhou, and Changyuan. So these were the centers, and actually the territory itself was about 8,500 square kilometers, which is approximately similar to Crete, the island Crete, or let's say 2 average Hungarian counties together. That was their territory over there. And of course the centers themselves were already centers in the French Jesuits' times, so there were already churches there. But there were several smaller places, villages, new settlements, which the Hungarian Jesuits themselves founded and built. For example, there's a very nice a new settlement named New Kalocha, where the sisters came from for teaching the girls, because this Hungarian town actually financed the building of this settlement. In 1929, they built a church next to which this new culture was built, and inside the new church they installed an altar image, so a huge picture onto the altar, which is a version of a very famous Hungarian painting, The Baptism of Vajk, by Gyula Bencúr, which is actually this Vajk later, after his baptism, became Stephen, first king of Hungary. And we've got a picture, a nice photo of this image on an altar in New Kalocha, and that really resembles this very famous Hungarian painting. So it's a very, let's say it's not a typical, but a very nice example of cultural exchange or export of a little Hungarian culture to the Chinese villages.
Briefly, what is the history of the Hungarian mission in China?
Yeah, after in the 1920s there were more and more Hungarian Jesuits. There came a point where they became independent from the French. It was very difficult though, because of financial reasons. The funding was not suitable, but later on it became possible that they became independent. So in 1936 this Tamil mission became a Hungarian Jesuit mission. Before that the Hungarian Jesuits just joined the French there, but from 1936 on it was really their own mission. And even 1 year before that, the Pope founded an apostolic prefecture with Taming as a center. That's a pre-diocese state. So before there is a diocese erected, an apostolic prefecture is founded, and the apostolic prefect is the head of that, like a bishop, he governs that region for the Roman Catholic Church. So because the apostolic prefect was the same Miklós Szarvas, who was the first Hungarian Jesuit in China, and who was the superior of the independent Hungarian Jesuit mission in the same city where the center of this apostolic prefecture was. So that was mid-30s. Unfortunately, less than 2 years later, the Japanese occupation came, so the independent Hungarian mission had very few free years, let's say. Still, it remained an independent mission till the late 40s. And because of the Civil War, in 1946, they had to leave Taming, actually, so the center, the central town of the mission, but they continued their work in the southern parts of this territory. So basically in Puyang or Kaizhou and Changyuan, these were the longest, the places where they could stay the longest. And in 1947, so after they had to leave Taming, the Pope erected the Diocese of Taming, which was also maybe not the appropriate time for that. Still, the diocese was founded in 1947, but Miklós Szarvas came back to Hungary in the end of that year. They had to name a successor for him, and that was Gáspár Liserong, also a Hungarian Jesuit, who was there from I think 1926 already, so from quite from the beginnings. And he became the leader of the diocese, not as a bishop, but as a apostolic administrator of the diocese. And he remained an apostolic administrator of Tamin diocese until his death, which was in the 70s, and he lived 2 decades now in Taiwan, in the island of Taiwan. Still, he held the title of the apostolic administrator of Tamin diocese. So after they had to leave Tamin, they stayed, or not every one of them, of course, because they dispersed all around China, not only China, but also in the Far East. So some of them went to Japan, some of them went to the Philippines, even to Australia, and some came back to Europe and to the United States, because back then they couldn't come back to Hungary because the new regime, the communist regime in Hungary, banned the operation of the religious orders in 1950, and they got several other difficulties even in the years before 1950. Besides Miklós Szarvas, no other Chinese missionaries came back to Hungary, only much later and only for a short period. So they went and worked as Jesuits everywhere else in the world but in Hungary. That was, let's say, late 40s, but several Hungarian Jesuits stayed, but in very, very different places in China. For example, other Jesuit missions, or in kind of illegality in small villages, etc., etc. And during the 50s, harassments and things like that, difficulties became more and more. In 1954, all of them were expelled from mainland China. So the last Hungarian Jesuit left Shanghai in 1955, and several of them went to Taiwan, where they tried to continue their Hungarian mission. In fact, very soon they became part of the new Far East province of the Jesuit order, which was founded in 1958.
The Franciscan order was also in China in this time. A Hungarian Franciscan monk wrote in his book later the following after Japan attacked China in 1937. At this moment, Tianjin and Beijing are already in Japanese hands. Whether much blood will be shed, we don't know. We only ask the good Lord that the war not have a negative impact on our missionary work, at least not permanently. Many Catholic schools will not open in September. Our school and our seminaries are filled with refugees. Our city is in danger and may become a battlefield. On our building, the papal flag waves, signaling to the planes that it is not a military building. So, how the Japanese attack on China did affect the Hungarian Jesuit work in China?
Well, it definitely affected, but it was not very serious, as we later found out. Actually, it was a little bit paralyzed, but not completely demolished or annihilated or something like that, because it was less possible, for example, to write back home, for example, and less possible to go to the countryside to visit Catholics there. But in the centers, they were limited but spared, in fact. So they, some historians say, and maybe that's true, the reason for that is that because Hungary was an ally to Germany and Japan, basically, that's why the Hungarian Jesuits were spared. I'm not sure if this is the main reason. This can be one of the reasons. Still, it's true that they were only limited but never really annihilated during the Japanese occupation. But it became extremely uncertain. The conditions became extremely uncertain, so nobody knew when will happen what will happen when. So it was quite dangerous to travel, and anything could happen.
Out of the city.
Yeah, out of the city. It was not very safe.
And the Japanese also occupied that region.
The Japanese occupied Taiming, the main center, in November 1937. So from that on, until basically 1945, this little bit limited work was allowed, but still it was allowed.
And no monks were harmed.
No Hungarians were spared.
So after the Japanese occupation and the Second World War close to end or ended, what did happen with the Hungarian Jesuit mission in the second part of the 1940s?
Yeah, first they thought they would stay there for a long time, but it soon became clear that it would not be possible because in May of 1945 the Red Army occupied Taiming and let's say liberated it from the Japanese, and the communist ideology was not really pro-Christian, of course, and so the harassments started right afterwards. The Red Army closed their schools, let's say, took the buildings or secularized their buildings, and forbade the support of the missionaries by Chinese people. So great poverty followed, and the end of 1946 there was also a destruction of buildings, bombs, and the army going there and destroying some buildings
due to the Civil War.
Due to the Civil War, and they had no money to restore the buildings. So finally, they had to. The end of 1946, they had to leave Taiming, but they didn't leave China back then. As I already told, they dispersed in the neighborhood first of all, and they still used the southern centers of the mission, basically Puyang, Kaizhou, and Changyuan. And so from 1947 in Kaizhou, it was maybe the only place in the territory of the mission where the Catholic worship was allowed at all. So Gáspár Liserong, the apostolic administrator, had his seat in Kaizhou, Puyang, where there was the church in use. In every Sunday, Catholics could go there. Of course, they were registered, but still they were allowed to go there until 1952, when this all stopped. Every foreign missionaries got or became captives. They were in room custody for 10 months. So in 1952, things changed for even worse. And in 1954, they were all expelled from China as imperialists. And back then, even Hungary, there was a communist regime, so they revoked the Hungarian missionaries' passports. So it became extremely difficult for them to stay anywhere abroad. So finally, the Chinese government decided to send them all away from the country. That's how the some of the remaining Hungarian Jesuits went to Taiwan.
So for our present days, what kind of memorial places or even any building that the Hungarian Jesuits built in any cities that they operated in China, is there any mark that they were there?
Yes. First of all, what I should answer is that I don't really know because I've never been there. But what I do know is that the church of Taming, which was built right before the Hungarians arrived, so it was built by the French in the early 20s. It is still standing and in use, and I think in the later decades there is also a Catholic seminary in the city, so a school where priests to be are being taught, being educated. So there are something. We are not sure if there is more, but in the very center, in Taming, I'm sure that the church which the Hungarian Jesuits used, not built but used, is still in operation.
And maybe in Taiwan, is there any Hungarian Jesuits still working?
No, the last one who was in Taiwan died in 2009, very old, but they were really appreciated members of the Taiwanese society, worked in charity and social fields a lot. For example, one of them, István Jaskó, founded several hospitals, even for mentally and physically challenged, which was very new, even in the 70s, 80s Taiwan. It was not very common there to have institutions for the mentally or physically challenged. So the Hungarian Jesuits was among the first who founded such institutions there. So when István Jaskó died in 2009, there was huge solemnities, whatever, celebrating his life and work. He was really a highly appreciated person in Taiwan. Since then, at least one Hungarian Jesuit went there during his formation, but not for years or for missionary work.
Thank you for the interview.
Thank you for interviewing me. A doboz oldalára egyébként rá van írva, hogy ez egy sen. Ott arról is lehet volna már videózni a doboz oldalát. Tehát lenne egy fúvókája, és akkor ilyen szájharmonika-szerűen működik.
És ez pedig pipa, gondolom.
Ez nem, ez egy heget, tehát itt lennének húrok, ugye itt lenne még egy ilyen húrtartó. Ez egy két húros hangszer, és a két húr között van ez a vonó. És akkor ez egyfajta heged, ilyen kis mini.
És akkor ez a misszionáriusoké volt.
Hát nem, ez nem, hanem ezt
vagy csak ott kapták
valami, és hazaküldték, ez is ilyen pénzszerző akcióként, hogy kiállítható legyen.
Értem, hogy érdekes, egzotikus, igen.